So it surprises me a lot. It really surprises me when I watch multiple videos of people talking about their favorite Zelda games or their ranking Zelda games, and everyone just praises the hell out of Link's Awakening, and they talk about all this, oh, how much fun they had as a kid. And I'm like, how the hell did you beat this game as a kid?
We started this podcast talking about The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past because it's easily one of the most important video games of all time. Now, the series has gone on to have multiple games spanning many consoles, but it's also had its fair share of titles on handheld devices. Link's Awakening was Nintendo's first attempt at taking Link's adventure on the go, and with a mixed fan response, we thought it'd be fun to take a look at this game on another exciting edition of A Cast of the Past with a brand new episode each and every Sunday talking about the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s of video games and movies with yours truly, Juan Velas from Puerto Rico. Joining me as always from Boston, Massachusetts, we have Ryan McNulty. Ryan, did you play Link's Awakening growing up?
Teeny bit. It wasn't until, again, much later. I feel like I always have this story, but I played a lot of video games in college. That's kind of the main point I want to reiterate. And Link's Awakening was something I played in like 2009, 2010-ish. So way later after it came out.
And then from London, Ontario, we have Keith Pushik. Same thing, man. What was your interest level on Link games, Zelda games, and specifically the ones on handheld devices?
Honestly, I didn't touch the handheld games for a very long time. I think the first one that I played was Spirit Tracks on the DS, only because it came out on the same day as my birthday, and I thought that was cool. But I had a big falling out with the Zelda franchise around the N64. Like, I really enjoyed my time with Ocarina of Time. I didn't really like Majora's Mask and didn't touch the Zelda franchise till a lot of years later after that. I think Spirit Tracks was one of the first ones I picked up again, had a little foray with Twilight Princess, but never really got into the handhelds. The only one that I can say that I really enjoyed at the time it came out was A Link Between Worlds, and that's a great game.
Indeed. Folks, we talk about all sorts of things. You can actually check out our Link to the Past review. We've talked about Super Mario World, the NES game. That's available now also on the Nintendo Switch. So if you haven't owned a Switch, now's maybe the time to do so. And another reason that this episode was brought up is because inevitably some people are maybe not going to go to the Game Boy Color to play Link's Awakening because of the remake. But I do think it's interesting that all of us are naturally huge fans of Pokemon on the Game Boy, yet we didn't experience this, which seems weird because I think that people always say you owned a Game Boy, you owned either Super Mario Land 1 or 2, Tetris, or this game. So what was your interest level on adventure games on the go, considering you were fans of Pokemon?
That checks out. I only owned Super Mario Land of the three of those.
Yeah, I own Super Mario Land 2. I think it's just kind of a timing thing for me. I didn't really get big into the Zelda series until N64 era. I was playing Pokemon on the Game Boy around the same time, but Link's Awakening just kind of passed me by then. Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker were really the big Zelda games for me that kind of catapulted me into the franchise. And still, even then, aside from like Majora's Mask, I didn't really start to get into the Zelda series more until much later, as I said. So I just kind of missed it.
Yeah, I don't even know how I missed it back in the day because, like I've mentioned before, Link to the Past is one of my favorite SNES games, and I played a lot of A Link to the Past, but up until a few years ago, I had never even really thought about Link's Awakening or known that it was the quote-unquote spiritual successor to A Link to the Past, so I really don't have a good answer why I never touched it.
And for context, this game came out in 1993, so I think that because we naturally played the Game Boy many years later, it almost felt like, to me, I don't know about you guys, like this was a late or mid-90s game, but this started off the 90s. So for context, and this will make you realize just how old this game is. Other Game Boy games released in 1993 include Disney's Aladdin, which that year we also got the console games, and we're getting the remaster of that with The Lion King for Switch and all that stuff. Mortal Kombat 2 came out for that. And we also had the Game Boy version. A Cool Spot. Do you guys know who Cool Spot is?
Was that like the
that
7
red
Up
dude?
Game?
It's that red dude,
Yep.
right? That looks like
Yeah.
this.
Exactly.
circle.
For those on
Yeah.
the audio version, Keith is doing a circle. If that doesn't help you,
Did that
then
have something to do with 7-Up, or am I crazy?
yeah, no, that was actually it.
Okay.
Ultimate
Okay, I
marketing
just-
material.
Came with
I rented the
7-Up
Super
or
Nintendo
something.
version. It's just one big commercial, I guess.
Yep. And then the other one was Kirby's Pinball Land. But Ryan, could you check out some of the notable games overall, not just Game Boy, that were released in 1993?
Yeah, so also in 1993, we had Mega Man X for the Super Nintendo. We had Zombies Ate My Neighbors on the Super Nintendo as well, one of my personal favorite games, even though it's hard as hell. Doom for the PC, really one of the... Is that the first first-person shooter? I'm not sure, but it definitely revolutionized
Well, before
the
that was
genre.
Wolfenstein and all that.
Ah,
So this was
that's
like the first
true.
like real
The
step
first
forward
notable
after that.
one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Wolfenstein was notable too. But anyway, NBA Jam for the Super Nintendo, great classic game there.
my!
And Star Fox also for the Super Nintendo.
So needless to say, this was maybe not the strongest year, but definitely a solid year for games. I mean, people still talk about Mega Man X. We're going to be, we have a Mega Man X collection, and still more collections keep coming out. So just based on this, does 1993 look like a pretty fun gaming year for you guys?
Absolutely. I probably put 1,000 hours into Kirby's Pinball as a kid. I love that game so much, and maybe that's part of why it kind of got lost on me, that there's just so many games from that year that Link's Awakening kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I went to Super Nintendo a little bit late too. So I did go back and play things like Zombies Ate My Neighbor and NBA Jam, but I didn't necessarily hit every single game we kind of listed off.
So Ryan, could you talk to us a little bit more about Link's Awakening? I know that as I kept reading things, especially when the remake was announced, I think that woke up a lot of people. And you saw people, it's kind of like Majora's Mask with you and Keith, where people either love Link's Awakening or despise it. The three of us, and we'll get to this, played different portions of the game or up to a certain level, and we'll talk about our experiences. But as the biggest fan, we do have the Zelda tier list. Everybody can check it out in the archives. What is Link's Awakening for a Zelda fan?
So Link's Awakening, just to give background on the game itself, essentially it is a direct sequel to A Link to the Past. And to do a quick aside, and you guys will always be like, don't talk Zelda timeline. At one point, like this and the Oracle games have switched timeline placement, but essentially it happens after A Link to the Past, and that's all you really need to know. Link, basically, after he saves the day in Hyrule, goes on a little quest on his little boat, gets shipwrecked, essentially, and wakes up on a place known as Koholint Island, and... big spoiler alert, even though they make it very obvious throughout the game, it's essentially a dream world. And Link's mission is to awaken the windfish, because he's stuck in this, even though he's called a windfish, he's this big ass whale. And he is stuck in his,
The windy
essentially, yeah, he's stuck in his dream world. So this is one of the few kind of side games that isn't really focused around Ganon or Zelda or the Triforce, much like Majora's Mask. It's really kind of takes itself outside of Hyrule and all of that. And because it's in this sort of dream world, you can tell the creators, they had a little bit more creative license. So you're going to see things like Chain Chomps and Goombas, stuff from Mario, because they could do whatever they want. They're like, hey, it's a dream. Like, let's have some fun. Let's borrow assets from other intellectual property and just do something completely different. So this really is the first side game in the Zelda series, and it is, for a lot of people, a game they hold near and dear to their heart because they have fond memories as a kid playing this growing up, having all the time in the world to figure out a lot of these really difficult puzzles. But it also takes things in a little bit different direction in terms of story, in just that it's not just, hey, we got to wake up the windfish and save the day. You also have a little bit of a struggle emotionally with, you've gotten to know these characters and you have to think, well, there is a downside to me waking up out of this dream world, because it means the people that I've met along the way are going to be gone. So it really has a deeper thing behind it that other Zelda games hadn't touched on yet. So in a nutshell, I think that kind of explains where the appeal for Link's Awakening kind of comes in.
So I have a Zelda lore question based off of what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So Hyrule isn't all of Legend of Zelda's world. Like, Hyrule is the equivalent of, like, North America here, where somebody can leave Hyrule and go sail somewhere else. Like, the same way that you would, like, take a boat from North America to Europe, you can do that with Hyrule?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically,
I
the
didn't know
best
that.
example of that, because they've kind of made it unclear in a lot of cases, right? Because Majora's Mask, it seems like Termina is like a parallel universe, so it doesn't seem like it's even in the same universe. And
I'm so sorry,
Koholint
everyone.
Island is also this dream world, so that also is like, okay, whatever. But the Oracle games do have places that are actual physical areas that are not Hyrule. So yeah,
Okay.
Hyrule, exactly. Hyrule you could look at as like a country or a continent, if you will, and there are other continents. They just haven't really explored them too much. But even in like Spirit Tracks, they discover new Hyrule.
What's
so it
taking
is
them
like
so
a
long?
new
It's been
land.
like 20 games.
I know they could really expand this world a lot more. We really don't know what the globe looks like in
Jeez,
the
Link, leave your
Zelda
comfort
universe.
zone.
Yeah, Ryan,
Yeah.
I have a question. What's higher than Hyrule? And what's west of Westeros?
Wow.
Well, there is low rule, we know that. But again, it's
Shut
another.
up. That's not a real thing.
Again, they
low
do
rule?
the parallel dimension thing.
Ryan,
Oh
stop
my
blowing
God.
Keith's mind. We'll eventually, in 20 years' time, we'll review all the Zelda games. But I think that the biggest thing is obviously we don't have this obvious nostalgia factor as you have, for example, with
Low
Link to
rule.
the Past, because we didn't play this growing up, right? But it is fascinating going back to the other Game Boy games that were released in 1993, Mortal Kombat 2. Say you played Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo, one of the best fighting games of all time. So as a little kid, you're like, yes, I finally got this on the Game Boy. You pop it in, and it's like, what happened here? What's the problem? At first glance, considering we played A Link to the Past this year, right? So I think we are definitely a prime example of this working. I played A Link to the Past, and I'm like, hey, that still holds up. I played this game, and I'm like, look, I have my gripes with it, and we'll get to that, but it is the Super Nintendo experience in the handheld devices. It's not like most other ports. I know it's not a port, but it's still the same gameplay. They managed to maintain that video game integrity, and in 1993, that is damn near mind-blowing. I don't think this game gets enough credit, because I know we're going to have our complaints. I sure am. And I know Keith is going to as well. But rest assured, I think that you can always make the case for a game like this for why it's good and why it's bad. Mechanically speaking, I think they blew it out of the water. And for context, like, I love all these YouTube channels that do a lot of research about these games. I think the reason that you mentioned, Ryan, that they had so much creative liberty is because this was literally a passion project. Apparently, they wanted to do a lot of this on A Link to the Past and other Zelda titles, but they were not allowed to. So they sort of started doing this project as like, hey, what can't we do on the other games that we would love to have? And that's what this game became. So it truly is, as one of the videos stated, a love letter to Zelda as a whole, which leads me to, let's finally get to the nitty-gritty. Starting with Ryan, because he's the passionate Zelda fan here, give us your overall impression about Link's Awakening.
So we know there's the tier list I did of Zelda. So if you want to get my quick take on every Zelda game currently out, then you can go check that out. But what I said about Link's Awakening, I put it in what's known as the C tier. And for me, Link's Awakening, like you said, I completely agree. The translation from Super Nintendo to Game Boy was incredible. And Link's Awakening did a lot of great things for the series that you still see to this day. Link's Awakening to me is just a situation where I've only played through it completely twice, including for this podcast. And it's just a game where at the beginning, I'm on board and I'm having fun and I'm making my way through the dungeons and it's awesome. And then I get lost very, very quickly and I don't know what the hell to do. And even if you go to the telephone guy, it's usually not enough. And I find myself lost constantly. Most of the time in the dungeons, I can hold my own, but then you guys, I don't think you made it to the later dungeons, but they are, I think, some of the most difficult dungeons in the series, maybe even possibly the most difficult in the entire series. These dungeons, they took the whole like non-linear aspect and really difficult puzzles and obscure puzzles to a whole new level. So I do find myself getting frustrated with these games, with this game in particular, because a lot of times it's very, very obscure what you're supposed to do to progress in this game. So great puzzles and everything, but very difficult to progress at a lot of points.
I was going to say, there's like a struggle that I have with my thoughts in this game where how much I'm willing to accept the argument of, well, it's the version on the Game Boy, and give it a pass for that, because to go back to that analogy you made earlier of Mortal Kombat 2, of playing the console version, then you go and pick up the Game Boy version, and, well, it's a watered-down experience. I would say that this is that version of A Link to the Past, and it's almost kind of a disservice to call this game like the spiritual successor to A Link to the Past for that reason, where I think that there's a lot of tediousness with this game, unnecessarily so, maybe because of the limitations of the Game Boy, that I just had a really, really hard time coming to grips with and giving it that pass for that reason. But overall, I give them props for what they tried. I think that there was more failure than success, but like Ryan had said, the beginning of that game, I think, is great. You're having a lot of fun, but once you get later in the game, the word tediousness is the only word that comes to mind, where the game just becomes tedious and basically works against itself in a way where it's almost too ambitious for the mechanics that they had to work with the Game Boy, and ends up dampening the experience, in my opinion. And as I progressed through the game, and I will fully admit I did not finish it, I made it to the beginning of the 6th dungeon, and partly ran out of time, partly threw in the towel because I didn't have it in me to see it through. But at that point, the game had just gotten so tedious that it created that emotion for me. And I think it gets worse as you go on, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, so for context, Ryan did complete the game. Keith and I managed to watch full walkthroughs past the 5th dungeon. And for me, what I got to say is, me as a gamer, and this is going to apply to this game, to any game, I think there's a balance between fun factor and challenging in games. That's the hardest part of a game, right? Because if you make a game too easy, you get bored. Make a game too hard, people go away from it. And I think A Link's to the Past is like the AAA movie, right? It's the big budget thing, so they were able to control, like, hey, there's a reason why we didn't put that into this game. Sure, it's a cool mechanic, but it makes things a lot more complicated. And because Link's Awakening, in many ways, it's like the indie film, it's like, oh, we're trying to tell a different story, right? We're going to go deeper into that. And we got to add these additional mechanics. And it's completely unique, and in many ways, I think it is a more complete experience as far as options go than even A Link to the Past. Like, the fact that you can combine items, even though you only have 2 buttons, which is a pain in the ass, but the fact that you can do that is a huge deal. But it kept piling up, and the fun factor kept going down.
But it sucks to do it doesn't make it a great thing. Like, it's the old Jurassic Park argument of just because you could doesn't mean you should, because one of my biggest struggles with the game was exactly that. Like, yes, it's cool that you have all these unique items that are crazy. When you think about it, they added jumping into a Zelda game. In the traditional Zelda overhead view, you can jump, but if you're sacrificing the experience to make that happen, I don't think that's a good thing.
And not just that, I just want to say quickly, as the casual fan, out of the 3 of us, I fully admit I'm the super casual Zelda fan. I think that if this was a sequel on the Super Nintendo, this would be a very different experience, because I do think they could have fleshed out a lot of things, having more buttons, so you wouldn't be having to go to the menu every single time grabbing items. That right off the bat, like towards 20 to 30% of my playthrough, I fully got why people were complaining. Because at first I'm like, not a big deal. You're only switching between these things. But once you have to start combining items, then you're checking out that menu so much that it just stops the gameplay. And I think that's another challenging thing of any video game. It's like the moment that you pause the thing, you break that immersion. You're no longer Link. You're thinking about the game mechanics, and I think the fun factor goes down. So based on this initial part, Ryan, what else about this experience? Focusing on the more positive things first. What is the general takeaway as far as like Link's Awakening is great because of blank? What's that blank for you?
So I would say Link's Awakening is the great things about it. First of all, they introduce some great things like mini bosses, which I think are really cool. Link to the Past didn't really have that going on, so they added mini bosses along with dungeon checkpoints. Right, it was getting to the point where they were very ambitious with, and I think ambitious is a great word you touched on earlier. Ambitious with the size of the dungeons. So the fact that they give you kind of that midway checkpoint after you defeat a mini boss was a really cool thing to do. I really like how much they incorporated story throughout the game. I mean, the fact that they got these little cutscenes and stuff, that was more ambitious than even A Link to the Past in a lot of aspects. Crazy. Like going back through the game, I'd even forgotten how many that there were, and the fact that they even animated a lot of these. I was very impressed with how they were able to tell a story throughout the game with more than just dialogue boxes and having that imagery and telling and kind of hitting you on an emotional level that they hadn't before. And I also think this game's great for its unique use of the side-scrolling areas, and that's something that obviously you saw a little bit in Zelda. Well, you saw a lot of it in Zelda 2 in a way, and then of course they reuse it in the Oracle games, but I think the way they utilized it was really cool.
Keith, what did you think about that? Because that was a big deal to me, the fact that all of a sudden you almost get that Zelda 2 taste, or in my case, growing up playing platformers. It's like, oh, so it's not just up, down, left, right. I can actually move around, and not just that, the items apply as well. So there were a couple of parts where you did have to have the feather so you could jump. What did you think of that experience?
It blew my mind, where I think that is where the ambitiousness worked in this game. And even now thinking about it, it's hard to wrap my head around the fact that they had those 2D platforming areas where you as Link could jump on a Goomba's head and kill it. It's crazy to think about, and I love those parts of the game. And there, I will say, even though I did just bash it, there are good parts of ambition in this game, all of which Ryan mentioned, like the jumping thing, that first mini-boss in the first dungeon, where you have to jump over that thing that he's rolling. I thought that was one of the coolest parts of the game, just because you don't expect it. As somebody that just played like the traditional Zelda games, you don't really expect stuff like that, and I thought that was great, and they do a lot of good things, but they just do a little too much.
For me, I think the hardest part, and I wrote this on our Discord, acastofthepast.com/Discord, I almost felt heartbroken because I think the three of us have established we preferred the 3D Zelda games, just as a general preference. But we've played A Link to the Past, and we said great things about that game. It's like, hey, you can play that today, and it doesn't feel like an early 90s game. I played this game, and even though I didn't necessarily love my experience, if you had to choose like whether I talked about it in a more positive light or negative light, I would say great things about it. Because once again, mechanics are great. It looks great. It has Game Boy printer integration for the two people that have that. It has cutscenes, the music, like everything about it. The dungeons, yeah, they're super complicated, but it's like, not only is this a great Game Boy game, this is an excellent Zelda game, and not because it's on the Game Boy, yet despite everything I've been saying, because you would think that's like an S tier, A+ review or something, I force myself. Every time I put the game on, I was questioning myself, how come whenever I played A Link to the Past, as frustrating as it was, because I died a ton playing that game, I wanted more of it, more of it. Same thing with like a game like Dead Cells nowadays. But yeah, with this one, every time that I died, even though there's a continue, even though if you die in the dungeon, you don't lose the items, right? You remember the keys that you have, so it facilitates that. I still struggle to play it, except I can't answer why.
I
I'm
can tell
talking
you
about
why I
this right
won.
now. Okay,
I can
Ryan,
tell you
please
exactly
help
why,
me
because
out.
it's
Help me out, man.
probably the same feeling that I get in this game, and that's the fear of I don't know what to do next, right? Because no one wants to really play a game where they feel as though they are just completely stuck. I think that's just one of the worst feelings in a video game. And to me, Link's Awakening just has a lot of that. So it surprises me a lot. It really surprises me when I watch multiple videos of people talking about their favorite Zelda games or their ranking Zelda games, and everyone just praises the hell out of Link's Awakening, and they talk about all this, oh, how much fun they had as a kid. And I'm like, how the hell did you beat this game as a kid? You either
Nintendo Power.
Yeah. So it's like one of two, I guess one of three things. Nintendo Power, for one. Two, they just had all the, as a kid, they just spent hours and months playing this game and finally beat it after months. Or
Androids.
or they just never finished the game and they liked as far as they got in the game. That's what I have to think, because some of these things, to me, I would just never know to do unless I looked up a guide. And I fully admit, to complete this game, both instances, I had to use a lot of guides, because the last two dungeons and the trading sequence and all that stuff are very difficult. And I'm a type of person, I'm kind of like a main quest kind of guy. I have to really love a game if I want to go outside sort of the main quest. And I wouldn't think that, hey, you need to pick up the Yoshi doll in the shop if you want to start a trade sequence. Like, how the hell am I supposed to know that? And like other random things that are annoying, like the bow in this game is not a requirement for the first 98% of the game, right? I was like, oh, I can ignore the bow. You get in the shop, but you actually don't need it. I get all the way to one puzzle in Turtle Rock, which is the last dungeon of the game, where you absolutely need the bow. So I had to leave that dungeon, go all the way down to the shop. It's 980 rupees for the freaking bow. So I had to farm rupees and then make my ass all the way back up to Turtle Rock to get to where I was. So that was a very odd choice.
That makes me want to die hearing that.
Yeah. So there's some really obscure things that you're just like, what the hell? Like, why do I have to bring a ghost back to his house and all this stuff where, it's got personality, but the arbitrary nature of some of this can create a lot of frustration, I guess, compared to modern games.
So something I wanted to say here, and I know we're talking decades upon decades of differences. Breath of the Wild and this game. Breath of the Wild was praised for many of the things that we're kind of complaining about right now, right? Breath of the Wild, you started off kind of like you do in Oblivion, Skyrim, and games like that. It's like, hey, here's the world. Do whatever the hell you want with it. This is where you got to go. This is the final objective, but how you get there, what you get, is almost entirely up to you. This game, it is a little bit more linear, because obviously it's a 2D game, right? So you can't try to sneak around certain areas. You are kind of obligated to go up, down, left, and right. But it made me feel lost almost immediately as well.
Mm-hmm.
I did have to look up a couple of things.
There's a huge difference between the two because, again, like you said, tons of years between them. In Breath of the Wild, you take 3 steps and you find something to do. This massive world just has tons of things to take care of in it. You take 5 steps to the left, you bump into a shrine. In Link's Awakening, the difference is you have this massive world for a Game Boy game, but only one thing to do in it. So you're just beating your head until you find that one thing, that one block of screen that you need to be on. You run in circles until you find it, or you go look at a guide, which I had to do as well, because it just got to the point where my frustration level hit just way too high and needed to look up what to do.
I just thought of something. Let me know what you guys think of it. And I think this just helped me click with why I wasn't a big fan of this game. A real cool thing about video games are Easter eggs, right? Where you got to go around, and here's the full experience on the left, but if you really want to get 100%, you gotta cut this bush to find the hidden item. I feel like with this game, they turned the Easter eggs into the full experience. That, like Ryan mentioned, the Yoshi. Who would have thought? The bow at the end of the game. Who would have thought? That usually you do see in a game like an Easter egg. Super weird example, but Star Ocean: The Second Story. Great JRPG on the PS1. You can play the full game, the full-fledged game from beginning to end, and you miss out on a couple of things, but at no point is there something that makes you feel like I'm missing something. However, there is an entirely different part of the game that requires you to talk to this one character, go back to the specific place, but that is the reward. I feel like this game, Link's Awakening, takes that thing, which is a neat, special, unique feature that not every gamer needs. Because maybe it's cool. That doesn't mean you need it, but they made that the experience. And I think that's why I felt drained. I felt tired playing it because it's like, look, I'm disconnecting from the day. I just got off of work. I want to have fun. Stop making me figure out where everything is. Who would have, like, I get it. I got to knock this thing down, the bird, to get this thing. I got to find 100 freaking seashells so I can get this thing, eventually have the bar go up. It was a legitimate job. It was almost like a part-time job playing this.
Yeah, it was very difficult to know what was side quest and what wasn't. And I think that's something when you look at Majora's Mask, it's a similar game where there's a ton of side quests, right? But if you just wanted to rip through the 4 dungeons and go to the end of the game, there was a path to do that. And then there was plenty of side stuff if you wanted to do it. It was much harder in this game to distinguish what is a side thing and what is not a side thing. Like what is required to actually get into the dungeons, because I tried to skip as much of the seashell stuff, and you only have to do the trading sequence up to a certain point and then you can skip the rest of it. But it's not entirely obvious that you do need to skip the rest, like that you can skip the rest of it. So it is a little difficult to distinguish, hey, what is the main quest, what is not.
Mm-hmm. Thank God for quest logs is basically what we're saying.
Yeah. So just as a quick thing, this is a thing that was meant to be played by like a 10-year-old. What kind of games were you guys playing when you were 10? Just generally speaking, genre or specific game?
Platformers. Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario World, Mario 64 probably at this time. N64 was probably out. I was a big platformer guy.
Keith,
Yeah.
Same thing?
Yeah, platformers and fighting games. A lot of Kirby Superstar, Street Fighter 2, Clay Fighter, Mortal Kombat. Mostly platformers and fighting games.
Pretty much the same thing. I'm trying to get into the mindset because obviously we're talking about
And
this
A
game in
Link to the
2019.
Past, of course.
Of course, but we're talking about this game now. So obviously it's like it's easy, and you know we follow a lot of wrestling podcasts that say the same thing. It's easy to talk about this now when decades have gone by, and it's like, oh, this is why this didn't hold up. But back then, do you think that maybe as kids we're sort of undermining kids because they don't know that something is impossible? They're going to try it, right? So what we see now is, oh, I'm feeling lost. Maybe we wouldn't necessarily feel that when we were 10. We just tried to eventually figure out every nook and cranny. And maybe that's what made the experience long. Like I saw the average beat time of this game is around 12 hours, with a lot of speedrunners going around 3 to 5. So there's a massive difference, right? So maybe that exploration is part of it. Maybe you're not meant to play this game and beat it in 5 hours. People can do that, but maybe that wasn't the experience that they wanted.
Yeah, I think it's... That was their intent, is that they really wanted people to explore and figure things out. But yeah, if you don't like that kind of game, then you're gonna find it hard to enjoy Link's Awakening in a lot of ways. Because when you get to the dungeons, it feels like, you know, A Link to the Past minus a button. You know what I mean? You get into the Zelda mode again, and you're enjoying it. I just appreciated that A Link to the Past, you know, you did have to do some things sometimes to get into dungeons, but for the most part, you had a direction, and you knew what to do and how to get there. And I don't like the feeling of feeling lost. And, you know, in today's modern gaming world, it just feels very difficult to, you know, you don't want to feel lost anymore. And it's not like, I don't have that sense of exploration like, oh, I can't wait to find out what's next. I just have this, which I can feel for some games like Breath of the Wild. This game, I just felt like, what am I supposed to do? Because like he said, there is side quests, of course, but to progress in any shape or form, you have to figure out what the thing is for the main quest. Whereas Breath of the Wild, hey, maybe you don't know what to do for this shrine yet, but you can go and do 50 other shrines. Whereas this, it's like, after you run out of mini games to play, if you don't know what to do for the main quest, well, you're not going to really be able to do much.
Let me ask you guys a question. Something that I struggled a lot with my thoughts on this game. How different of an experience do you think this game would be if on the map they had like the indicators the same way that A Link to the Past did? Like, okay, in the light world you need to go to these 3 places. If they just added like a number or the landfish instrument item to the map, do you think it would create a much different experience in this game, just so it gave you some sort of indication on which way you needed to go?
I do think it would make a big deal because at the very least they could do something where once you get near the dungeon, there's at least some sort of NPC or some sort of hint as to, hey, you can't enter yet, and the
like,
owl
hey,
tells
I need
you,
a
hey,
green
go.
Yoshi or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to give you a little bit more hint along the way. And like I said, there was a hint area, those little telephone tree houses, but they weren't always super helpful. And they would kind of just give you a general gist of what to do. But there might be 1 or 2 steps before whatever that guy's telling you to do. You know, you just don't know it yet.
Yeah, and I think that even though they did do that inside the dungeons with like the chest and stuff, I think that was kind of useless. And if anything, it got annoying after a while. Because it's like, hey, it'll give you a sound for whenever there's something in this room. But generally, if you beat up all the enemies or something, the chest would pop up, leave the room and come back, and the sound would still keep playing. And
Every
I thought
time
that was a little
you
annoying.
went in the room.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And I think that going back, I think this game is punishing, but not in the holy crap, you're going to dialogue because the enemies are super difficult. I think it's punishing in the sense that you get tired. I felt exhausted playing Link's Awakening. And I think even the worst game, if you don't feel exhausted, you can push through. I've beaten games that are like 8 hours long or super mediocre. If you go to the, out of 5 rating scale, that game will be a 2 or a 3. But you're like, you know what? I'm not being challenged like that hard to like give up on the game, so I'll give it a chance. Here's the game with all the game mechanics in the world, with a ton of features, a ton of unique elements, 2D and 3D games. I mean, it's a 2D, but you get the point. You know, the top-down view and the side-scrolling, yet I was not compelled to play this game a lot. So let me know if you agree with this comparison. It's the too much birthday cake analogy. I think if you give people too much birthday cake, if too many features, you do get exhausted, and I also felt like that. I think if they would have scaled it back, it's like you don't need to have every single dungeon be, hey, now if you drop in this area, which you didn't even know you could do that, and then you're going to be on a lower level, but then you go here, and then the boomerang or whatever, if you shoot it at a certain angle, it's going to trigger this. It's like, at some point, you make that a sequel. I feel like that's why any video game, not just this, at some point they have to have a cutoff period. Because if you add so many mechanics, it's like every level is going to be different, and that looks cute at the beginning. But it's exhausting for us as gamers, at least for me.
To me, it all comes back to that one word I mentioned at the beginning, tediousness, where you have all these great ideas, but when you put them together, the act of doing that becomes tedious. The fact that there are some rooms in that game where you have to enter the pause button menu like 4 times just to equip the things that you need is a bit too much. It's awesome that you can do it. It's awesome that the fact that you can run with the Pegasus boots, jump, and then get a farther jump is something that you can do, but the fact that you're getting rid of a sword at the same time and there's an enemy waiting for you right there becomes tedious, because then you're going back to that pause menu and you're having to re-equip the sword, and then once you kill that enemy there's a stone behind it and you need to go to the pause menu and you need to equip the power glove so you can pick up the stone, and then you need the jump again, so now you're going back to the start menu and you're re-equipping the jump button. It's just becomes tedious.
Yeah,
And
the Game Boy,
yeah.
The Game Boy needed one more button for this.
real.
For this,
One
yeah.
more
Like
button.
if it had just one more button, I think it would have saved everyone a lot of time. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, for me, Link's Awakening, my frustrations with Link's Awakening boil down to this. As we've gone over plenty of times with progression, knowing where to go and what to do. The fact that not just, as Keith mentioned, the frustration with having to pause for going through dungeons and switching items, but the fact that the overworld, you need to do the same thing, right? So I have to lift these boulders every time I go through this path, and then I have to jump over this pit every time I take this path. And you very much don't like to give up your sword unless you really, really have to. So most of the time you're treating it like you only have one item besides your sword because you don't want to give up that sword because there's enemies everywhere. If they had, I don't know, the memory of the game and everything, but if they had allowed it so that, hey, you have the item now, you lifted those boulders and they're just gone now, that might have freed some things up. And then, like I said, the later dungeons are very overwhelming. The Eagle Tower and Turtle Rock, if you don't have a guide, God bless you, because there's some really crazy stuff you have to do with knocking down pillars in the Eagle Tower, and then there's just so many paths in Turtle Rock, and there's even keys that you don't necessarily need to use to finish the dungeon, so you could go down a wrong path. You won't get stuck, but it's just there's a lot of sidetracking and non-linear stuff, which, hey, I'm all for non-linear stuff, but I guess just the way my brain has developed with video games is it's much easier for me to kind of keep track in 3D space. So if there's a bigger 3D dungeon, it's easier to me to remember where I was and like what rooms are what. And it's a lot harder in 2D where graphically a lot of rooms look kind of similar. So it's much harder to navigate, especially before you get the compass and the map. And some of them, you get them a lot later in the dungeon. So some of the dungeons in the later part are very overwhelming.
And I think that generally speaking, for everything that we're complaining here, I can totally see, and I know that somebody watching or listening is thinking the same thing that I'm about to say. That's why I love this game. And I could totally get it. There are people, it's like, look, it's the same
Dark
way
Souls
that for me.
is like a critically
exactly. I was
acclaimed
going to say
franchise.
that. It's like there is a thing, and some people like punishment in video games, and that's an actual thing. I mean, the fact that you say Souls-like and you get it, right? It's like a genre where you're going to die a lot. It's going to be super challenging from the mechanics to the memorization. And something else that you brought up now, Ryan, which kind of blew my mind a little bit. This game, I think, in many ways has more features than even Ocarina of Time. When you talk about the combination of items, I think that this game could have been an incredible 3D Zelda game, but they were just stuck in a time where that was not a thing. Because when you think about all of the things that this game did in 1993, let's not forget this was many years before Ocarina of Time. Imagine, I don't know how many of these people were involved in developing Ocarina of Time, but imagine if they were able to have those extra buttons, the 3D layout. I think that maybe they made Majora's Mask. Who knows? And that's why maybe that one worked.
I think one big thing that they could have done, and, eventually we can talk about, hey, there's a remake coming out, so there's a lot of room for them to make Link's Awakening a much better experience. But I think the power bracelet in particular, I think, is a huge problem in this game because there are so many pots to lift. There's so many rocks to pick up. There's so many big statues to get to pick up later when you get the upgraded power bracelet. And I think when you look at things like the Zora flippers that you get, where it doesn't require you to switch items, but it's adding a new element to the game, that this game clearly needed more of that. So if they had just given you ability where your sword breaks pots and you can break those rocks with your sword, and something else like where it basically wouldn't have required an item, I think that would have, even just doing that with the power bracelet would have saved so many pauses in this game.
Seriously, if they just did that with the power bracelet and even the Pegasus boots, I would argue for, if you made those just things that you could do and you didn't have to equip, I would have a much different experience with this game, because that's where most of my gripe comes from.
So what would you guys say is the best thing about Link's Awakening? Almost to the point that it exceeds other Zelda games, because I do think that maybe the overall experience is not the best for many people, but there's got to be a takeaway with so many great things about the game.
I have two answers for this. I think that this is some of the best sound design in a Zelda game, just like the background music, everything except when you pick up those power-ups. Those power-ups make me want to claw my ears out. But beyond that, all of the sound design for the dungeons, using the chiptune themes, I loved every little bit of it. It's one of those games that I want to go listen to outside of the realm of playing the game itself. So I love that part, and I love the camera aspect of it. This game is probably the best use of the Game Boy camera that I have ever seen. How you're going through the game and getting those snapshots, those very, very detailed snapshots of the game. I enjoyed when I got a new one of those and wanted to seek out as many of them as I could. It's one of my favorite parts of the game, without a question.
Yeah, I would say what this game does best is have a really cool, unique story. I think that is honestly the strongest part of this game, because you meet the characters. You meet Marin, who's sort of like the bizarro Zelda, and you meet all the townsfolk, and there's a lot of like fourth wall breaking, sort of, where you talk to some of the kids and they tell you the controls, and they're like, I have no idea what any of that means.
Did you enjoy that? Because that rubbed me the wrong way.
I don't know. I know
significantly.
going in that this game, it didn't like it. It had personality that you didn't see in other Zelda games. And I think the personality in the story is what really stands out. Like I said, you're trying to defeat this nightmare to awaken the Windfish, but there is a negative to what you're doing, because, you know, Marin and the other characters are going to go away, and Link, you know, has grown fond of these people, and he's kind of doing a bad thing by eliminating them, but he's also having to get rid of this nightmare, and also, you know, he has to move on with his life.
I think that for all of that, that's maybe my favorite takeaway from this game, is that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this in many ways, whether you like it or not, is a portable Zelda experience. But it's in the same way that I thought that the Vita was a letdown. It's like, I don't want literally the console game in handheld mode. I want it to be a little crazy, a little bit different. And I did enjoy the fact that, hey, how come we have Nintendo like Mario characters in this game? How come for no reason we go side-scrolling for like 2 seconds when you go down this ladder, but then it's back? Literally because. Why do we have the Game Boy printer integration? Because we can. I love the fact that they did a lot of because we can things in the game. I think that maybe just somebody, it's like, I feel like this game was made by Hideo Kojima. Somebody just didn't like hold, it's like, hey, get you, I know you can do that. That doesn't mean you should. But I love that creativity, and I think more games should not be afraid to do that. And, you know, I mentioned Metal Gear Solid as an example. You know, Hideo Kojima, it's like, we have Metal Gear Solid, we have Metal Gear Rising. You know, I think that this game is the regular experience, but it's out there at the same time. You know, I played other Zelda games, but I haven't played anything like this. Even though mechanically it's very similar, there's so many things that you go like, what would a Mario game with Zelda things look like? Like, that would be freaking awesome, right? That would be something that would be interesting.
I mean, people have been trying it in Mario Maker.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're trying it, yet they did it. They did it in 1993. And for whatever reason, I don't know if Nintendo, we've seen them, even though now they do Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, like they do mobile games. So maybe now they would be willing to do that. But it's like over 20 years ago, you tried this and maybe you didn't knock it out of the park for everybody, but it actually made sense. Like, don't be afraid to do more M. Night Shyamalan stuff. We've talked about like Sixth Sense and all that. So it's all a dream. Hey, it's all a dream. So anything goes to Nintendo. You can do whatever the hell you want. So
we should also bring up, I think we failed to mention, even though we're talking 1993, I'm guessing we all played the DX version, which integrated Game Boy Color. I believe that came out in 1998. And I think, is that where the Game Boy printer integration came in, was the 1998 version? Or did they have Game Boy printer in 93? I'm actually not sure.
I didn't do that much research, Ryan. I just do the games that came out.
I will fact check. But yes, they did add a couple things like the color dungeon to the DX version. But since that's come out, that's been the version to play. So just wanted to make it clear to everyone we were playing the DX version.
And something that reminds me there is that Obviously, with the exception of Ryan, even though Ryan didn't play it on a Game Boy Color, you played it on a 3DS, right?
I bought 3DS Virtual Console. Game Boy printer was
So
98
still,
by the way.
okay. So still, it was backlit, which something that always blows my mind playing Game Boy Color games nowadays is how colorful they were. Because keep in mind that it was not backlit back then, right? So they could have gotten away with not a lot of color, not a lot of variety. But
Not
when you
if
play
you owned
these
a
on an
worm light
emulator,
like me, baby.
dude, I had the warm light. That
Yeah,
thing
it does.
is-
It's not
oh.
the same as a backlight. No,
Yeah.
the game looks beautiful on the 3DS
Right?
Virtual Console. Yeah.
It reminds you of just like how amazing technology is. You know, at that point, were they even thinking about backlit screens? I know that was an option for some things, but we didn't get that till like the Game Boy Advance SP. So think about that. And even then on the DS, that was not initially backlit, so they actually went back. So Nintendo's been doing a lot of weird things, but did playing this Game Boy Color version make you more or less interested in the Switch remake?
I'm cautiously optimistic about the Switch remake at this point, where with the experience that I had with the Game Boy Color version, it makes me not want to go out and buy the game, but at the same time, I really want to see how it is, because they have this opportunity with the remake to take the things that I mentioned, like integrating the Pegasus boots and the Power Glove into just passive things that you can do. They have more buttons now. There's no excuse not to do it. So just from that alone, I think it can greatly increase the experience that you have with this Link's Awakening remake. But if they just make the same game with the same limitations, I think it's going to be a very disappointing product because of that. So I'm hopeful, but it's a very let's see how this goes situation, where before it was a snap buy, no question.
Yeah, I'll be honest. After playing through this game, because the end of the game is so daunting that I'm like not in the mood to want to play the remake. But I will be playing it at some point or another.
You
And
have to.
yes,
You
I
have
know
no
I have
choice.
to.
You're the
First of all,
Zelda guy.
The visual style of the Switch remake is amazing.
It
like
is.
it looks like these little clay figurines almost. It looks so cool. And just for that alone, I'm going to have to play it. So all the trailers indicate that it looks a lot like a shot-for-shot remake, but I can tell you for sure from the reports that I've read, the Power Bracelet is a dedicated button. So
Thank God.
praise the Lord. We have that as a dedicated item. I'm guessing we're going to have an additional button as well for like a second item. So that alone is going to make the experience a lot better.
That makes me infinitely more excited about that game.
In terms of helping people progress through the game a little bit easier, I don't know what changes, and I haven't read anything up on that. I don't know if there's information out there yet, but I'm very curious to see if there's going to be any sort of way that they smooth out where to, like, for people to progress through the game. So I'm very curious, and that alone is probably going to make me at least play through the beginning of the game just to see how they handle that.
I think I'm on the same boat. I initially was a definitive must buy because at that point we had decided on reviewing this version, right? So I was thinking, hey, I won't play the Game Boy Color version. I'll just try this one. I'm very happy I did play this one though, because I don't know if the traditional Zelda games are for me. Even though I enjoyed A Link to the Past, I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as I played Ocarina of Time. Like Ocarina of Time, I beat that game around 3 times, and I do have the version on 3DS, and even though I didn't beat that version, every time I go into it, it's just a smile. It's just like a natural smile. It's like it's like this ride that you know exactly what you got to do, but it's fun, nonstop. You look at the environment, and I really do appreciate that, but I don't know if I'm going to buy that. And, you know, Nintendo games don't really tend to drop in price, so it's not like, oh, I'll get it when it's $20. You know, given the Switch, you know, we don't have Nintendo Selects on the Switch yet, so I doubt that's going to be a thing, even though it's going to be, I forget, it's 40 or 60. Regardless,
I believe
I think it's going to be
40.
60.
Oh, okay.
No, I think, well, Ryan, if you could look up that information.
Yeah, I
as
will
well.
look it up.
Yeah.
You're the official fact checker for today.
But meanwhile, Keith, what would the legacy of how important do you think Link's Awakening is in the grand scheme of Zelda games?
After everything, I think it has an important legacy of they took a game like Link to the Past and they were able to bring it to a handheld, for better or worse. I think if this game was a complete failure, you wouldn't have that long line of handheld Zelda games that we inevitably got, including one of my favorite ones, A Link Between Worlds. So I think it's fairly important just from that alone, and deserves. I'm really happy that it's getting this remake, so that way more people have the opportunity to experience it and enjoy it. Because when it comes to would I recommend this in 2019, it's a hard no. But with hopes of the remake being just a friendlier version of it that people can have its lineage exposed, I think that it's a great thing from that respect.
Yeah, so it is $60, by the way. So that makes
that's
it harder.
even more disappointing.
Makes it harder.
It's got
for
a
me.
Zelda dungeon. I mean, you can make your own dungeons.
Yeah,
Like,
it
let's
does
be
have
real,
that
guys.
kinda.
Are you gonna buy this, or are you gonna buy Pokemon Sword or Shield? Because it's the
know,
same price.
I know. I will
Yeah.
fully say, even as a huge Zelda fan, it is a little bit of a tough buy for me to want to shell out $60 for it. Just because, like, I will eventually, but because I just played the original, it does
You're
make it
good.
a little tough for me. But in terms of the importance of Link's Awakening, as you said, this was literally a passion project where basically Nintendo's, the developers, they were like sneakily after hours making this game. And once they had a little bit to show, they basically showed it to their bosses and they were like, you know what, it looks good, let's move forward with it. So it wasn't even supposed to happen, but because of that, we've gotten many great handheld Zeldas, Minish Cap, A Link Between Worlds, the DS games. That's all because of this game. And much like Keith would say, I wouldn't recommend this to someone who's looking to just get into the series. If you are a diehard Zelda fan and you haven't played these games, then
Fans of the genre.
played this game. Yeah. If you're a diehard Zelda fan, you should play this game. But if you want to get into the series, this is not where you start at all, is what I'll say.
Yeah, and generally speaking, you mentioned it here, Ryan. It was a passion project, and it was not supposed to happen. Another game that was very similar was Super Smash Brothers. So I think this game, Smash, reminds us that, hey, it's sometimes nice when developers don't ask, they do, and they go like, oh, okay, it's a pretty solid idea. And just out of curiosity, I actually looked up the highest-selling Game Boy games. Apparently, this includes Game Boy and or Game Boy Color. Because I said at the beginning of the podcast, hey, it's got to be top 5. Surprisingly, no. So the top 5 selling from number 5 is Pokemon Yellow at 14 million copies, which, holy crap. Then
Lord.
Super Mario Land at 18 million. Pokemon Gold and Silver at 23 million. Jeebus. We're not done. Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue, because remember, this depends on the region, at 31 million copies. And then Tetris, that's obvious, at 35. 35
Pokemon
million
just
copies,
cheats, man.
people.
That's
Pokemon
insane.
just cheats.
Yeah, big shock. Pokemon is the most popular thing on this planet, especially in the 90s.
Yeah, and for those curious, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is at number 15 at 3.8 million. Technically, because Oracle of Seasons and Ages are different games, they outsold Link's Awakening at 3.9. Barely.
Probably because a lot of people went and bought both of them. So again, kind of like this Pokemon thing where you can kind of, and Oracle of Ages and Seasons was kind of the result of Pokemon. They're like, oh man, look at this.
We can sell
gotta do
multiple
our own
versions of
games.
this.
So I will say to you guys, because the Oracle games basically use a lot of the same assets and stuff, they're even more. They're in a lot of ways even more challenging than Link's Awakening.
What?
So,
All right, so I'm never touching them.
You guys are probably like backing away slowly.
Keith,
like, no,
I bet
thank
you. Hey, Keith, I bet you $100 we will never review Oracle Seasons and Ages. What do you say to that? You
Well,
up for
yeah.
that bet?
Considering you said earlier in this show that in the next 20 years we will be reviewing every Zelda game, I will take your $100.
I take it back.
We'll save them for last. I think we're gonna move into the 3D world.
Hopefully there's a remake of those by this time.
Yeah, they deserve remake treatment too. And I'll say, when we talk about the music of Link's Awakening, and you were talking about how you enjoy like the themes and stuff, I actually am not a fan of the overworld theme in Link's Awakening, because when I played these games, I basically went Link's Awakening, Ages and Seasons, like bing bang boom in a row. And by the end of that, because they share a lot of the same music, by the end
drained.
of it, I could not stand that music. And you also probably know why I'm frustrated with these games too, because I shouldn't have played them in a row.
Do Ages and Seasons have that terrible power-up music in them as well? Because I enjoy the music.
All the high-pitched stuff.
That is the worst track I have ever...
Like the acorn stuff? Oh my God, no.
I think they're also in those games, but I can't remember for sure.
It's the worst idea.
But for me, definitely Link's Awakening. The only theme I actually really like is, and a lot of people like it, as the Tall Tall Heights theme. The one that kind of just sounds like a remixed version of the overworld theme. It's like do 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 do. Yeah, that one.
That was good music.
That one is awesome, and the like remake Switch music I've heard, it's amazing.
So, yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, if you want to just look that up on YouTube, it's really nice. The orchestrated music in the remake so far sounds amazing.
So, we're not going to be reviewing another Zelda game for the rest of the year. Based on this, it doesn't seem like we may be talking about the Link's Awakening remake, but I think that the answer, we've talked about this during A Link to the Past episode, our very first one. We've talked about this during the Zelda tier one. But after playing this one, if you selfishly were to handpick the next Zelda game that we review at any point next year, which one would it be and why, starting with Ryan?
So as much as I'd like to cover Majora's Mask, I think it makes sense to go with Ocarina of Time. And I know everything in the world has been said about it, but I think if we're jumping into the 3D Zelda world, I think we got to start with Ocarina, and just to kind of like set the stage for everything to come, because I feel like our conversations for every 3D Zelda game after that will be in the context of looking back at Ocarina. So I think we should start with Ocarina.
You don't want to do Majora's Mask because you're not ready to go to war, son.
I want to set Juan up to finish Ocarina before we cover Majora's, because I don't think he'll enjoy Majora's as much if he hasn't gone through.
I've beat Ocarina like 3 times, man.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
you said you hadn't finished it like the most
3DS
latest
version.
Time.
Yeah, the 3DS one.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I do agree with
episode,
your line of thinking, Ryan, where I think it is time to jump into the 3D Zelda realm. And I would say, you either start at the beginning of 3D Zelda with Ocarina of Time, because everything does incrementally build off of it, or you just go like Wind Waker or something like that, just because of how different of an experience Wind Waker is compared to everything else. Because yes, things build on it, or the 3D games kind of build on itself, but then there's Wind Waker kind of hanging out way over here. That was its kind of own experience that they never really did again, because once Wind Waker was over, they went back to, hey, can we recapture that Ocarina of Time lightning in a bottle? And I love Wind Waker for that reason, and want to get to it someday, sooner rather than later, because of it.
Yeah, I'd say for me, those two games would definitely be the ones we reviewed. Like if we reviewed 2 Zelda games this year, I would say maybe start the year with Ocarina of Time and then play Wind Waker. Not just because I have the Wii U version and I've literally not played it, waiting for that episode that will happen eventually. That's maybe part of it, but I will
Wind
like
Waker
that.
I haven't played in a while, so that's definitely up there. But Ocarina would be nice because I know I could crush it so fast.
Yeah, it's like, man, in your case, you wouldn't even need to replay it.
I mean, I've been playing the randomizers and stuff.
Yeah,
and even completing it through that way. So.
Yeah, so everybody, please let us know what are some of the games you would like us to review next year. We've actually already decided between the three of us some of the games that we will be talking about towards the end of the year. So If you're a fan of horror stuff, be on the lookout. We have some stuff lined up for October and definitely December. The best way that you can keep in touch with what we will be reviewing is on our social media. Usually on Wednesdays on Twitter, we will be announcing the stuff. So we publish a new episode every Sunday. I try my best on social to, on the Wednesday, say, hey, we're going to be doing this, or what?
You do a great job with social media. I just wanted to say it here.
Thank you. I try. Especially when you send me the damn clips, people, because if you go on Instagram, you get to see some exclusive. I really set myself
up for this.
Oh, you totally.
Getting called out live.
Yeah. Ryan made this face of, Keith, why are you opening this box
you're
on the
playing
podcast?
With fire, my friend.
But, Keith, why you say that? Because people are going to want to check this out now. If you head on over to our Instagram, A Cast of the Past, that A is very important. We publish not only clips of the podcast, but exclusive 1-minute reviews, which I can't wait to see what Keith has lined up. I know they're going to be freaking awesome when he sends me.
I'll do one right now. All right. We talked about Pokemon.
Man, people, an episode within an episode. Here we go.
We talked about Pokemon. The thing that I own the most collectibles of is Pokemon. Like this Lugia figurine that's been on my desk for years. It's a little, it's not in focus because my camera can't do it.
Did that come with Soul Silver?
It did. It came with Soul Silver.
Oh, man.
I don't know
what happened to mine.
Yeah, I don't know where my copy of Soul Silver is, but I know where this figure is, and I love it to death. Somewhere I have a Mewtwo pocket watch as well. I love Pokemon collectibles. There. Put that on the Instagram and suck it.
Wow.
But people, that doesn't count. You won't see it on the Instagram. But seriously, if you enjoy the podcast, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, even on Facebook. That really does help. And as always, we do have the Discord if you like to talk with us among or between episodes. That's acastofthepast.com/Discord. And last and certainly not least, even if maybe YouTube is not for you, maybe you prefer to listen to the podcast on the road, as most of the people that do check us out do, which we recently passed over 2,000 listens. So thank you for being so awesome with us. But you can't subscribe on the YouTube channel. That does help us out tremendously and get the word out. So up until next time, ladies and gentlemen, that has been it for our review of Link's Awakening on A Cast
to the
Past.
Keith, so, okay. We're closing it off with this. Do you have movies or games nearby you, like that you can visually see?
Yes, I have one.
Okay, this isn't helping me, but okay, you're gonna review that for a fact in 1 minute for the Instagram. So give us a sneak peek. What will you be talking about on the Instagram?
Well, one, I just want to tell you that if you just dance, it'll be okay.
Oh my God, what?